The great hall of Riverrun was tense as Jon Snow stood before King Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. The flickering light from the hearth cast long shadows across the stone walls, and the air was thick with anticipation. Robert sat at the head of the table, his broad frame leaning forward, his eyes sharp and calculating. Beside him, Ned's face was unreadable, though his piercing gaze bore into Jon with quiet intensity. "You've seen her then?" Robert began, his voice a low rumble. "The Dragon Queen?" Jon nodded, his posture straight despite the weight of the moment. "I have, your grace. Daenerys Targaryen received me in Astapor." "And?" Robert's voice was sharp, his impatience evident. "Did she make demands? Declare her intention to claim the throne?" "No," Jon replied firmly, meeting Robert's gaze. "She has no intention of claiming the Iron Throne, at least not now. She made it clear that her focus is on the Night King and the threat from beyond the wall. She understands the danger and wishes to unite against it." Robert scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Unite? With her? The daughter of the Mad King? She expects me to trust her, after what her family did." "She expects nothing, your grace," Jon said evenly. "She told me to deliver this message. She will not lay claim to Westeros until the Night King is dealt with. Her war is not with you. It's with the dead." Ned, who had been silent until now, leaned forward slightly. "And you believe her, Jon?" Jon turned to his uncle, his expression resolute. "I do." She spoke with conviction, and her actions support her words. "She has dragons, yes, but she's using them to prepare for the real fight. She's not the threat here, the Night King is." Robert grunted, his hand gripping the goblet on the table. "And what of this Varos? The one with the dragons larger than hers? What does he want?" Jon hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Varos is focused on the Night King as well. He claims his dragons burned thousands of whites beyond the wall, delaying the Night King's advance. He warned us all. The living must stand united, or will fall." "Bloody sorcerers and their warnings," Robert muttered, shaking his head. "First dragons, now this. Do you realize what you're asking, Jon? You want me to set aside every grudge, every reason we fought wars, and hold hands with a Targaryen. I'm asking you to save the living," Jon said, his voice firm but respectful. "The dead don't care about who sits the Iron Throne. If we keep fighting each other, we'll lose everything. Daenerys knows this, so does Varos, and we've already lost time debating what should be obvious." Ned turned his attention to Robert, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his bond with the king. "Robert, you've seen the reports from the wall. You've heard the warnings from the Night's Watch, and now you've heard from Jon. The threat from the north is real. We can't afford to ignore it." Robert sat in silence for a moment, his face dark with thought. The room was still, the crackling of the fire the only sound as he mulled over the words. Finally, he exhaled deeply, setting his goblet down with a heavy thud. "All right," he said, his tone grudging but decisive. "If the Dragon Queen wants to fight the dead, she can. But I'll not have her marching south with her dragons once the war is done. Make that clear." Jon nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "I will, your grace." Robert turned to Ned, his expression hard. "Send ravens to the north and the south. The banners are already called, but we'll need more. And get the bloody veil moving. They can't sit this one out." Ned inclined his head. "It will be done." Robert stood, towering over the table, his voice rising with the authority of a king. "We'll deal with the dead, Jon. And if your Targaryen queen proves true, then we'll fight together. But mark my words, if she so much as looks at my throne, this truce ends." Jon met Robert's gaze, his voice steady. "She's not my queen, your grace, but she's not your enemy either. Not yet." Robert grunted, then turned to leave the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing as he departed. Ned stood and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, his voice quieter but filled with pride. "You've done well, Jon. Now we prepare for what's to come." Jon nodded, his expression somber. "The Night King won't wait. We need to be ready." As the room emptied, Jon stood for a moment, staring into the fire. He had done his part, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on his shoulders. The living were gathering, but whether they could stand united long enough to face the dead was a question that only time would answer. In the quiet of Riverrun Solar, with only the crackling of the fire and the faint murmur of soldiers outside, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark sat alone. The weight of their recent discussions hung heavy in the air, and the tension between old friends was palpable. Robert swirled the wine in his goblet absent-mindedly before taking a long drink. "Daenerys Targaryen," he muttered, breaking the silence. "She says she'll wait. She says she's here for the dead, not the throne. But how long will that last, Ned? How long before she decides she deserves what her father lost?" Ned leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. His face was stern, his voice low. "That's not the only problem we face, Robert. This Varos, he's something else entirely. His dragons are larger than any in living memory. If even half of what we've heard is true, they're bigger than Balerion the Black Dread." Robert slammed his goblet onto the table, the force of it echoing in the room. "Bigger than Balerion," he spat. "The gods must be laughing at us, Ned. How in the name of the Seven are we supposed to fight dragons like that if they turn on us? The North, the Wall, the Night King, those are problems enough. But dragons that size?" Ned's jaw tightened, his voice steady but grim. "We don't stand a chance against them, Robert. Not as we are now. Valyrian steel and ancient legends won't be enough to bring down dragons of that scale, especially ones bred for war. If Varos decides he wants more than to fight the dead, we'll be helpless to stop him." Robert leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're saying what I already know, Ned. But what do we do? Ally with Daenerys? Trust her dragons and this Varos to fight the Night King, then hope they don't turn on us afterward? It's madness." "It may be madness," Ned admitted, "but it's the only path we have. The Night King is the immediate threat, and we have no choice but to fight alongside anyone willing to stand against him. But we must be prepared for what comes after. If Varos and Daenerys both survive this war, their dragons will make them nearly unstoppable." Robert's face darkened. "You think they'll come for the throne once the dead are dealt with?" Ned hesitated before answering. "I don't know. But if they do, we'll have no way to stop them. Dragons like Scourge and Vermilion, they're more than weapons, Robert. They're power incarnate. Even the combined armies of the realm wouldn't stand a chance against them." Robert rose to his feet, pacing near the hearth, his hands clenched into fists. "Then what do we do, Ned? Sit here and wait to see if they burn us alive when this is over? We're not fools. If they mean to take Westeros, they'll do it with fire and blood." Ned stood as well, his calm voice a stark contrast to Robert's frustration. "We don't wait. We plan. We make alliances, strengthen the realm, and prepare for every possibility. The threat of the Night King may unite us now, but the future will test us in ways we've never seen. We must be ready." Robert turned to face Ned, his expression grim but resolute. "And if they don't wait, Ned? If they turn on us before the dead are dealt with?" Ned met Robert's gaze, his voice heavy with determination. "Then we face them together. But for now, we have to trust that their hatred of the dead outweighs their ambition for the throne." Robert exhaled deeply, his anger simmering into reluctant agreement. "Fine. We'll deal with the Night King first. But if this Varos or Daenerys shows even the slightest hint of treachery, I'll remind them both that Westeros is no land for dragons." Ned placed a steadying hand on Robert's shoulder, their bond of friendship unspoken but understood. "We'll face it together, Robert, one battle at a time." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their responsibilities pressing heavily upon them. The world was changing, and the choices they made now would shape the fate of the realm for generations to come. In the strategic chamber of Riverrun, Ned Stark and Oberyn Martell stood over a large table covered with maps and markers. The atmosphere was heavy with purpose, the crackling fire casting flickering light on their focused expressions. Both men carried the weight of impending decisions, how to divide their forces to deal with Tywin Lannister while still sending enough men to the wall to hold the line against the Night King. Oberyn traced a finger along the riverlands on the map, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain. Tywin is a cornered lion, Stark. He'll lash out if he feels caged, but we can use that to our advantage. He's pinned to the west with Riverrun and the Riverlords holding their ground, and Robert has enough forces to press him from the south. If we want to box him in, we need to cut off his supply lines through the Golden Tooth and secure the Red Fork crossings. Ned nodded, his expression thoughtful. You're right. The Riverlands are the key to containing him. If we can control the crossings and fortify Riverrun, Tywin won't be able to move his forces eastward without suffering heavy losses. But we can't commit all our men to this. The wall is vulnerable, and the Night's Watch needs reinforcement. Oberyn tilted his head, a faint smirk playing on his lips. A delicate balance, then. We can't let Tywin see us weaken our position while also sending enough men north to make a difference. A single misstep, and we'll lose on both fronts. Ned leaned over the map, pointing to Riverrun. The Tullus will hold this position with the Riverlords. I'll send Robb with a significant force to secure the Red Fork crossings and fortify Moat Cailin. That will protect the north and prevent Tywin from advancing further east. But we'll still need enough men to send north to the wall. Oberyn tapped a marker near the Golden Tooth, his tone measured but sharp. Send a smaller detachment north, led by someone Tywin underestimates. Perhaps Jon Umber or one of your more seasoned bannermen. Make it appear as if they're reinforcements for the Tullus, but redirect them to the wall once they've passed the neck. Ned raised an eyebrow, considering the suggestion. A clever ruse, but it could risk leaving the Riverlands vulnerable if Tywin sees through it. Oberyn shrugged, his expression calculating. Tywin doesn't trust anyone. If he sees you moving forces, he'll assume you're fortifying the neck or preparing for an assault on Casterly Rock. He won't expect you to send men to the wall. His pride will blind him. Ned nodded slowly, his mind working through the logistics. And what of you, Oberyn? Dorne has remained cautious in committing troops to this war. Do you have men to spare? Oberyn's smirk widened, his eyes glinting with mischief. Dorne has plenty of men, Stark, but our lords are stubborn, and they'll need more than my word to march. However, if the Sand Snakes and I can hold the western passes, it will further isolate Tywin. Ned placed a hand on the table, his tone serious. We'll need every advantage. If you can secure the western passes and cut off Tywin's retreat to the rock, we'll have him surrounded. He won't risk an open battle with Robert pressing from the south and the Riverlands fortified. Oberyn nodded, his smirk fading as his expression turned serious. I'll see to it, but Stark, we need to ensure that enough men reach the wall. The Night King is no ordinary foe, and even the greatest strategy against Tywin won't matter if the dead march unchecked. Ned met Oberyn's gaze, his tone steady but grim. I know. The wall will not be forgotten. I'll send Jon Snow north as well, to act as a liaison between the men we send and the Night's Watch. He's seen the reports, and he understands the stakes. Oberyn leaned back, crossing his arms. A sound plan, but remember, Stark, Tywin is not one to be underestimated. He'll fight like a cornered beast, and if we leave even a sliver of an opening, he'll exploit it. Ned nodded, his voice resolute. Then we leave no openings. We'll box Tywin in, fortify the wall, and ensure that the living stand a chance against the dead. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their decisions settling over them. The battles ahead would test their resolve, but for now they had a plan, a fragile balance that would decide the fate of the realm.